Okay, if you're single and you want to meet someone and you're not getting the results you want, it can be extremely frustrating. It can feel like hard work. It can feel like dating apps are full of either people that are fake, that have no interest, that just want casual relationships. Quite frankly, you can end up losing hope that there's any possibility of meeting anyone worthwhile. Or you might have met some people you like and had it crash and burn. Now, the devastation of a heartbreak is tough, right? If you've met someone and fallen for them and they don't want the same type of commitment that you do, or they've lied to you, or they've cheated on you, or simply decided that you're not the type of person they want to see, it's devastating. And if you have a string of those types of relationships, what it ends up doing is it erodes the trust you have in yourself. Maybe you start to feel like your picker is broken, that you can't choose the right men. Maybe you've got a habit of choosing men or women. You've got a habit of choosing men who are commitment phobes, who don't want the same level of commitment as you do. Maybe men who are seeing more than one woman at the same time. Men who haven't moved on from their partner. And equally, if you're a guy, you could be in having the same experience. Dated a woman who's not over her ex, dated women who were in it for what you could give them, dated women who were cold. There's a whole pile of things, and it's quite devastating when you can no longer trust yourself to, choose the right type of person for you. Now, I find that at this point of time, people will often say, if only someone else could choose the person, it would be okay, because they've got no level of trust in themselves. But what I want to say is that doesn't work either. Often, it's not just the person that you're choosing, it's how you're behaving when you enter that relationship that causes it to crash and burn. You might end up self-sabotaging. Now, love it or hate it, I've been watching Australian Married at First Sight. Now, it really is good to observe human behaviour when you watch it, because it shows you a lot of what can happen. And, when you're watching other people, you might be able to see yourself in that. Obviously, it's a social experiment, and not many of those relationships work long term because of, of who they match, or they choose people who haven't gotten over their stuff and end up self-sabotaging. And that's what I want to talk about. And I want to use some examples from the Married at First Sight show, so you can go back and have a look at it and see what I mean. It's always good to look for yourself. So a lot of the couples in this 2022 series have had an initial attraction to each other and were quite happy with who the experts put them with, the majority. And it was quite interesting to see that unfold. So I want to talk about a couple of those in today's video. The first couple were Dominica and Jack. Now, they had an instant spark, and you could see it. They were really happy with who the experts matched them with. Then they go to the wedding reception, and Dom is worried about her past, and she's worried that her past will put Jack off of her. And so she's stressing all the way through the wedding, can't enjoy it because she knows she's got this big, what she feels like is a secret or a past hanging over her. So she takes him aside and tells him her past. And her past was that she was with someone for 4 years, and after they got married, she left him 2 months into the marriage, and they're now divorced. So she felt a huge amount of shame, guilt, and regret for what she did. She'd also lost a lot of friends from that. So she felt she was judging herself really harshly. She believed that her future groom husband would judge her that way too. And so when she told, it was really hard for her to tell him the story. And when she told him, he goes, that's okay. Everyone has a past. He goes, I was with a girlfriend for 4 years. We grew apart. We might not have been married, but I can totally understand how that can happen. He was really understanding, and she was really relieved. So things are good. They go off on their honeymoon. Now, as Married at First Sight does, it brings out the honesty box to push the relationship. Now, in a normal relationship, you wouldn't have to meet the person you're married, get married, have a honeymoon, have huge amounts of honesty without building up the fondness for each other. So in the honesty box, the question Jack had to ask Dominica was, what's your biggest failure? Now, her biggest failure was divorcing and having a failed marriage. And it's one of the biggest stressful experiences you could do. Now, I know of plenty of couples who felt what she did and persisted with the marriage, ended up divorcing and caused more damage. So in some ways she was brave to walk away from it. It can be hard when you feel trapped into something that's arranged. Anyway, she was very emotional, saying how she felt that shame, that guilt, that regret. And, it is her biggest failure, and she is still worried that will impact how Jack sees her as a wife this time round. And Jack was wonderful. He goes, that's your past, it's the future moving forward. I said on our wedding day we're okay. I get that's a big deal for you, which was great. So then she had to ask him a question. What is your biggest fear? Now, I love how they match up the failure with the fears. So it's a shit show, right? He'd had a string of people who had not followed through on their commitments with him and let him down. And he goes, in fact, everyone's always let me down. And my biggest fear is of that happening again. Now, instead of her hearing what he was saying about his specific fears, she related his fears to her failures and goes, I knew it. I knew that you were thinking that I might want to leave this marriage. I knew that it would get in the way of you trusting me, etc., etc. And he goes, they kind of had a bit of an argument over it, got quite emotional. And he still said, that's your past. It's what you do going forward. I'm just trying to tell you about myself. So they sorted it out. But what I want to say is what happens in a lot of relationships is you can end up sabotaging at that point, right? Because you haven't dealt with your own stuff. The feeling of guilt, shame, and failure that comes from a divorce does need to be healed. So you can feel okay about yourself rather than needing someone else to validate you. Otherwise, that becomes a block to love, and it becomes a place you'll continually sabotage because you don't feel like you're good enough. You feel like you're a failure. You feel unlovable. Now, in this case, he wasn't telling her that. That was her projecting her feelings onto him. And, as a relationship coach, that is exactly why I like to work with people first. Because as much as they were introduced to someone who was great for them on paper, but unless you've dealt with that emotional baggage, it's going to trip you up. It's going to cause you to sabotage. And you can bring up that subject a couple of times. But what I see with couples is that the girl will bring it up, and she'll bring it up, and she'll bring it up, and she'll bring it up. That ends up being the thing that pushes them apart because you go, I just can't deal with this. And for a lot of people, it can be the reason why they have a string of short-term relationships or a string of relationships that don't work. So, what I like to tell people is really important to look at yourself first before you go into a relationship. Otherwise, you'll end up bleeding on someone who hadn't hurt you in the first place, right? Now, the other thing that I want to talk about is another two couples. It's funny how behavior can have a direct input. A lot of men feel like they don't have any influence over what happens. And I want to talk about two couples. There was Celine and Anthony. At the wedding, you would think that they were the perfect couple for each other. So good. Like you go, this match, the experts have got it right. It's going to be a happy match. Well, it deteriorated. Then you had Tamara and Brent. Now, she was quite judgmental. She had quite high standards, quite opinionated. Looking at their wedding and their reception, you kind of go, they haven't got a chance in hell of making it. Now, they're the couple that's doing better than the couple that had this great connection. And I want to tell you why, and it's quite interesting because sometimes you guys feel like you don't have any power in the situation. So Tamara and Brent, when they're in this, he looks at her and goes, yeah, she's hard work. She's a challenge. But I like that. I'm up for the challenge. Game on. I'm going to win her over. And that's exactly what he did. She gave him shit and he bantered with it. He didn't take it personally. He didn't get bogged down. He just kept moving forward. Now, move forward into some of the episodes. You can see her pulling her guard down, being vulnerable and opening up to him because he didn't take it personally. He took the challenge to win her over and was playful and had fun, but didn't lose himself in the process. At some stage she's insisting he should say sorry, and he goes, no, I didn't do anything wrong. So he was strong enough and stood up to her and was the equal. And like I said, you could see her walls come down. Now, Celine and Anthony were quite the opposite. They got off to the good start, but it didn't translate long term. He tended to be too vulnerable too soon. Celine put her walls up because she'd been hurt in the past, and he took that quite personally. And instead of going game on, I'm going to be playful, I'm going to win her, he went the opposite. He kind of went, oh, she's hard to deal with, I can't get through to her, I'm being vulnerable and she's not coming back. On the flip side, she felt like he wasn't being strong enough. Now, I've talked about this before. Women from the caveman days, biologically speaking, we want a guy who we can count on, who we can trust, right? And if we give you shit early on and you can't match that and you kind of, I don't know, get upset with us, we feel like you're not strong enough to deal with us and protect us. So she kept saying he's not a man, he's not being the man I want him to be. That would have been what she meant. Now, don't get me wrong, I am not endorsing either girl's behaviour because both girls could have made it easier for their grooms. They could have gone in and been playful, less judgmental, curious, got to know the person without having these massive, dirty, great walls in the way. But the reality is women often do that, guys. They often are protecting yourself. But there is an approach that can work and win some over, and there's an approach that will repel. Now, if you want to see those examples, go and watch the show, right? And again, I felt quite sorry for Anthony because he seems a really nice guy. And it seems like he was trying. And, he's a good-looking guy, but he was kind of missing what she needed for him to grow that attraction. And sometimes it's a long-term game, not a short-term thing. And you guys are going to come across women who are difficult, who you're attracted to. So sometimes being able to be playful, not take it personally, take it as a challenge and win them over, you can. But, and on the flip side, women, if you want to get the best out of a guy, be playful, be curious, be less judgmental and get to know who they are rather than put them through all of these tests. You might be surprised at who you come across. Now, that was a longer video than I meant to do, but the reality is that sometimes we're getting in the way of our own happiness by how we're behaving. We're bringing our past into our future and we're sabotaging ourselves. And awareness isn't enough to change that. You often need someone that can come in and that's got the tools and the skills to help you change that. And that's where I come in as a relationship coach. So, matchmaking may be one thing, but it's not about it is about choosing the right person, but sometimes you can have the right person in front of you and sabotage it. And like I say, that can be why you can end up in a string of short-term relationships or failed relationships. Anyway, thank you for listening. My name is Debbie Rivers and I'm a relationship coach. Bye for now.